I live between, if you know the California geography at all, I live between Sacramento and Lake Tahoe. And actually about that same elevation between the two of them, too. Sacramento is about sea level, and the Lake Tahoe area is about, some of those mountains get to be over 10,000 feet. We're up at about 4,000 feet in the foothills in the town of Forest Hill. For a number of years, I worked with Weimar, a similar institution to Uchee Pines, and we currently live about 40 minutes from there. I'm heading up a group called Compass Health Consulting, and you can see it up there, Compass Health Consulting Incorporated, and you see my email address there, Dr. DeRose at compasshealth.net. I have that up there because if you see anything in these presentations that you would like, we can send you an electronic handout. We'd be happy to do that. There's two ways to get it. One is you send me an email. That's the most foolproof way, and that's also the way to send me a reminder, Dr. DeRose at compasshealth.net. And then we've also got a little sign-up sheet here, too. And the sign-up sheet is, if you indicate on there, you got to indicate on this sign-up sheet you want the handouts. But if you do that on the sign-up sheet, just do that. And it also, the sign-up sheet is specifically if you want to be on our mailing list. You don't really need that right now because most all our resources are here on special, most all of them are special half price in the, what do you call that, your bookstore, or the bookstore in the Lifestyle Center. So if you haven't been in there, we've got a number of my DVDs and other resources. So, but we come out with new ones and we have special pricing. And if you want to learn about that, that's the sign-up sheet there. So, those are some of the preliminaries. We'll talk more about the work that I do as we go through our mini-series together on a variety of topics. But before we launch into things, let's invite the Lord to be with us. Father in heaven, we come before you this morning realizing our need of you. You've brought us here, some of us from far away, others from close by. But we believe we're here because you want to better equip us to be involved in ministry. Please help us to that end. Guide my mind. Guide us collectively, for we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, most Christians are familiar with the closing words of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. If you've got a Bible, and there are Bibles in the pews, I invite you to turn there to Matthew chapter 28. For a very familiar commissioning service that Jesus gave just prior to his ascension. I'm in Matthew chapter 28, and it says this. Matthew 28, beginning with verse 18. Matthew 28, beginning with verse 18. And Jesus came and spake unto them, saying, All power is given to me in heaven and in earth. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I've commanded you, and lo, I'm with you always, even unto the end of the world. Amen. This is what we often refer to as what? The Great Commission. But what many Christians don't realize is that Jesus was giving the Great Commission, or a form of it, multiple times after his resurrection. Now you might say, well, how do we know that? We know it because in Mark, we have another recitation of very similar commissioning. The best evidence suggests that in Matthew 28, all the believers that could be gathered together were there. You could study that out. It sounds, as you're reading through it, that maybe just the 12 or the 11, as Judas had already sealed his fate. But in Mark 16, we clearly have Jesus just speaking to his immediate followers. And it's quite interesting as you read this commissioning here that it reads a bit differently. So look at Mark now, Mark 16, beginning with verse 15. He says there, Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be damned. And these signs shall follow them that believe. In my name they shall cast out devils, they shall speak with new tongues, they shall take up serpents, and if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover. Now, why I think it's so significant that Jesus didn't just give the Great Commission in Matthew 28, that he gave it at least 2 times, we can say that. To me, the suggestion is that Jesus was focused on charging the church with their mission as he was preparing to leave this earth. Jesus didn't do one particular type of things after his resurrection. At least there's no record of Jesus after his resurrection doing something that was the hallmark, or at least one of the hallmarks of his ministry before his crucifixion. What was that? That's right, healing. There's no examples of Jesus physically healing anyone after he was resurrected. Have you ever thought about this? Or can you think of any examples that are eluding me right now? Can you think of anyone who Jesus healed in those 40 days after his resurrection? No one. So why? It seems that Jesus is transitioning from him being the one personally doing the ministry to commissioning his church to carry on his ministry. Are you following along with that connection? Every time Jesus commissioned his followers to do his work, he gave them a 3-fold charge. Now, we saw it there when we compared Matthew 28 and Mark 16, but I want to see it with you as we look at a few other examples of this. I'm turning now to Luke's gospel. So we're getting a flavor for all the gospel writers that they carried this message. And I'm in Luke chapter 10. In Luke chapter 10, we're reading about the commissioning of the 70. And if you wanted to get a little bit of context, if you went back 1 chapter to Luke 9, you'd see there Jesus commissioning the 12. What I want you to notice, whether you're looking at Luke 9 or now we're looking at Luke 10, as you read through those 2 chapters and as you read about their commissioning, you will notice they were not just called to teach and to preach, they were also called to do what? Look at Luke 10 verse 9. What were they also called to do? To heal. They were called to heal the sick. And in Luke 9, when he's commissioning the 12, look at verse 2 in Luke 9. What also were they being called to do? They were being called to heal. So right now, what I'm just trying to affirm in all of us as we're going to begin some health presentations, every single one of us in this room, if we have embraced the Lord Jesus as our Savior, we are commissioned with this 3-fold commission. Because every time Jesus was passing off his ministry to his disciples, he said that we were to be involved not just with teaching and preaching, but also with what? With healing. So all of us are commissioned to be involved in healing ministry. Now, I know many times, I'm a physician. When I speak with lay people, they say, well, how could I do that? Now, I know many of you in this audience are health professionals, but others of you are not, right? You don't have an RN after your name or a physical therapy degree. Now, maybe it's a doctorate if you're in that discipline. You're not a nutritionist, but you're here at Uchee Pines because you're obviously interested in health, right? And what I'm saying is, it's not just a personal interest that God's given you. I believe God is opening doors for you to be involved in ministry. And so part of what I've done over the years is I've tried to help equip people to be more effective in health ministry. That's a lot of what I've done. So I've done that as a physician. I've also pastored. I've been a minister of the gospel. I have taught in college campuses. And in all those settings, one of the things that has driven my ministry is helping to equip people for ministry. So as we go through the presentations that I have slated over the next few days, I want you to be thinking in terms of why are we looking at this material? How does this help you to be more active in ministry? Let me give you an example. When I was working at Weimar Institute, similar, like I said, to Uchee Pines, if you're not familiar with Weimar, we would have people come, just like they come here, and they'd stay with us at Weimar for about 2.5 weeks. And we would see them change their lifestyle dramatically. We'd find people get off their blood pressure medicines and their diabetes medications. We would find people losing weight and feeling better. And so we saw remarkable things happening, just like you've seen here on this campus. But we also had people coming from our own community. And then they would go back, and we were saying, well, how do we connect with these people? How do we engage them to stay connected with us? Oh, yeah, they'd come for a lecture here and there. But we wanted to do something that would help them more spiritually. But the problem was the initial contact was in the area of health. Now, our program there at Weimar, like your program here, is a spiritual program. There was no secret that we were Christians, that we believed in the Bible, and we were pointing people to Jesus. But many people just did not have much of a Christian background. So as we were praying about this, we decided to come up with a series that we called Healing Insights from the Gospel of Mark. Healing Insights from the Gospel of Mark. Now, I was planning to have that with all the other resources there in the bookstore, and when we opened our boxes that we had shipped here, we found they didn't get here. They didn't make it. So if you order that on our website, that Compass Health website, we'll send you 2 for the price of 1, because we're trying to make everything half price. You say, well, what good will that do? What do I need 2 DVDs? The same thing. Let me tell you something really important. If you don't hear it right now, you'll probably hear it again. Whenever I give health talks in a church, one of the things I try to do is talk about the healing power of social connections. This is a hot topic in the public health community. We're talking about, most years I attend the largest gathering of public health and preventive medicine professionals in the world. Last year I was in Chicago. This year I'm going to be in Denver, Lord willing, at the American Public Health Association meetings. And the APHA meetings, they draw 10,000, 15,000 professionals from all over the world. And one of the things that they've been focusing on a lot is how we can make our communities healthier. Because we know, there's just some fascinating data out there. I don't know that we'll have a chance to talk about it, but let me give you an example. Obesity. There are maps of obesity in America. And if you look at those maps over time, you will see that the focus for high obesity rates is not all that far from Uchee Pines. Okay? And as you look at what's been happening over the last decades, it looks like a disease spreading. And as you're looking at these rates, it looks like obesity is an infectious disease that's being transmitted from person to person, and it's spreading from the southeast, and it's encompassing the whole United States. Now, of course, there's obesity in California and in Alaska. I was there doing some radio shows in Alaska last year. But the point is, there's obesity everywhere. But if you look at obesity rates, it almost looks like an infectious disease. And there was a research article that was looking at this. It's a very complicated article. In fact, beyond my ability to analyze it, because they were doing all these fancy statistical calculations, and I have some background in statistics, but nothing of the level that was required for this study. It was published in one of the science journals. Science is a family of publications, very highly regarded in the medical community. And what they were saying is, as they wrote about this pattern, is they're saying these things we think of lifestyle diseases are not just personal lifestyle relationships. It's the people that we connect with that actually affect our lifestyle. Now, some of you are nodding your heads. We say, well, that's pretty obvious. But if you start catching the implications of this, when I'm doing a talk or when you are giving a health lecture in a church, or when you are doing a health seminar or showing a health DVD in your church, you can honestly tell the people in attendance that you have got to come back here. You've got to come back to our church because here's a group of people in your community studying together, interested in their health. And this is important for you to be connected with to improve your own health. So what does all that have to do with 2 copies of Healing Insights from the Gospel of Mark? Well, I'm trying to encourage you to share with other people, okay? To connect with other people. Because as you connect, it improves your health and it improves the health of other people. So one of the great burdens I have is to connect people, to connect churches with their communities. And so we have all these resources. If you go into the bookstore, we've got a series on brain health. We've got a series on natural strategies for high blood pressure. We call it reversing hypertension naturally. We have a series on reversing diabetes naturally. We have a series dealing with health behavior change. We've got a whole host of resources there, even some things free. If you buy some of the resources, we've got some free gifts for you. Now, do you remember, I try to word that very carefully. My wife is the business manager of Compass Health Consulting. I think it's if you buy $50 in resources, you can either get one of the books I've written. It's a book on infectious disease prevention that we came out with during the Ebola crisis. So it's called Evading Ebola, but it deals with preventing infectious diseases in general. And then we've also got a couple of booklets that I just wrote with Pastor John Bradshaw. Do you know John Bradshaw, some of you, of It Is Written? So we've written a couple of little booklets that go along with this series, Healing Insights from the Gospel of Mark. So you can pick those up free if you'd rather have those instead of the book called Evading Ebola. I know it sounds kind of dated, even though it was just, a year and a half ago. But it's really dealing with infectious disease prevention. Now, some of you are sitting here thinking, well, this is an interesting talk. The title is saying Ancient Secrets, Modern Health. He's been telling us that we're commissioned to be involved in health ministry. Okay. He's telling us that he's involved in trying to equip people to do that, told about some of his resources. But what does this all have to do with ancient secrets and modern health? Well, I'd like to suggest to you the most powerful ancient secrets that have to do with health are found where? They're found in the Bible. And so we've got a mini-series actually called Ancient Secrets, Modern Health. And the first presentation, I'll give you some highlights from it this morning. And the second presentation in this 2 DVD series is actually on the book of Daniel, focusing on Daniel chapter 1. I just invite you to turn there for a minute. Some of you, if you haven't thought about Daniel 1 in a while, Daniel chapter 1 actually was the subject of a dialogue in the New England Journal of Medicine. How many of you have heard of the New England Journal of Medicine? Yeah, it's one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. There was a dialogue some time back as to what was the oldest clinical study. This was going on in the letters section of New England Journal. And the conclusion was the oldest clinical study was found where? In the book of Daniel, in Daniel 1. That's right. So this is in the secular scientific literature. Because in Daniel 1, you know the story, many of you. Daniel is a young Hebrew who has been taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar. He's marched literally hundreds of miles from Jerusalem to Babylon. And while he's there, he is given, we would call it today, the Harvard education and Harvard diet, okay? Maybe if you were on the West Coast, you'd call it the Stanford education and the Stanford diet. Whatever the prestigious, what do you call it here? The Emory education, the Emory diet? I don't know. What's the most prestigious medical institution around here? Emory? Tuskegee? Uchee Pines? Okay. Well, yeah, we can't use the analogy with Uchee because they're too far ahead. The Babylonians weren't that advanced, okay? Even though the world thought they had the best information. You're already connecting some of the dots. And so it is, when Daniel is brought there, look what happens. You know the story very well. It's quite interesting. Verse 5 in Daniel 1, the king is going to train these young men, Daniel and his 3 friends, as well as many others, going to train them, it says in verse 4, to really, what we know from history, is to be ultimately puppet rulers in their own nation. And so in verse 5 it says, the king appointed them a daily provision of what? The king's meat, or we would say today, the king's food. So they're going to get the finest diet. I mean, the king wasn't eating an inferior diet, right? So they're going to give them the king's diet. It's like you going into the cafeteria, and when you walk in, they say, you know what? I really like you. You can eat from the lifestyle guest section. You say, what? That's the finest diet here. And no, we're looking out for you. And so they let you go to that special table. Now, I know some people, on the staff are looking very worried about this. But you understand. Remember, this is the Babylonian wisdom. So they have all that. They have all those research studies like we have today, where people are telling us that we should drink alcohol for our health. Have you heard that one? Boy, I hate to even mention that without telling you the truth about it. Maybe we need to digress in just a moment. Don't let that thought escape me. But so they're being served. Did you catch it here? Not just the king's meat. As you read on, it says, and of the what? Wine that he drank. So nourishing them 3 years. How nourishing do you think that diet was? Well, you read through the account, and Daniel says, I'm not going to defile myself. By the way, that word defile, do you know where it comes from? By the way, can you defile the dirt? Can you defile dirt? I mean, you can't defile something. You can only defile something that's holy. So when Daniel says he's not going to defile his body, what is he saying about his body? He's saying his body is holy. By the way, it's not just a New Testament concept that we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. Daniel is in essence saying his body is a holy temple and he's not going to defile it. So Daniel asks for this 10-day trial. You can read about it there. And what happens? That's right. He is blessed with health. What diet did he request? Yes, it was a diet of pulse. We would call it a vegetable. Today you could call it a vegan diet. And so Daniel has this remarkable health. So here's where I'm going. I want you just to picture where I'm at. I'm interested in helping communities with their health. The average person in the communities that I deal with is not that spiritually in tune. So the first lecture that I give when I'm speaking about ancient secrets, modern health, is not about the book of Daniel. That's the last one. Because I'm trying to meet people where they're at, and then bring them to the greater truth, you see? Now some of you say, well, we don't need to do that here in the South, Dr. DeRose. Everybody believes the Bible and they love Jesus, and we just say, come and we'll study the Bible together. Well, that's wonderful if you can do that. But where I'm at, just back to the predicament we had at Weimar, trying to engage our alumni to come back, we decided to do this health series on the Gospel of Mark. So it was a health series, but we were going to go through principles in the Gospel of Mark. One of the fellows that came to that series, we'll call him Barney. It's not his real name, of course. Barney showed up, and as we're reading through the Bible, he'd never read the Bible before. He came, apparently, the Holy Spirit moved him to come, no doubt, but we came for a health series, and he's asking very honest questions. So we're reading about the miracles of Jesus, and we're reading about how Jesus spat and made clay and then put it on the man's eyes, and he said, is that how Jesus did all his miracles? Did he always spit before he healed anyone? I mean, that's how unfamiliar he was with the Bible. But he became engaged first on the area of health. So you say, well, how do you do that with this ancient secrets, modern health theme? I'm going to just expose you to it here. We'll look at some high points. I'll show you how I've used it. And what I'm trying to do is both give you some solid content. These first couple of lectures I'm giving you are some of the two different ways that I've used to approach more secular audiences. So one, a lot of people today are interested in other cultures. So that's what we're going to do here, give you a little bit of flavor for how I present this. It's quite different than many other Christians present it. And if you don't like it, you can just wish you were never here and never heard about it. be thankful that I gave you some more material at the beginning to put it in context. And if it works for you, please use it. And like I said, if you get your name on that mailing list, we'll send you the actual a PDF copy, a printed copy that has the different slides. So with that background, let's talk about Ancient Secrets, Modern Health. Well, when it comes to indigenous peoples, you've heard the names, haven't you? You've heard the kind of labels that are given. Backwards, ignorant, foolish, superstitious. Can you relate to this? But these are actually terms that were used in the 20th century to refer to indigenous peoples. We've become more politically correct today. We don't hear these terms too much. If someone uses these terms, we think they're somehow not very well educated or very sensitive. We're in the 21st century, and although things have changed dramatically, we're finding something very interesting. We're finding that many secular people, they've set aside the ancient wisdom of the Bible. They think that is old and antiquated, but they're embracing the ancient wisdom of Ayurveda, of East India. And they're open to the ancient wisdom of the Chinese. Now, how many of you find this somewhat interesting? I not only find it interesting, I find it inconsistent. But I don't start by talking to people, telling them how inconsistent they are. I start by telling them that this is something that the Western world's interested in, these ancient secrets. But I give them a caveat. And that is, despite the wisdom of ancient cultures, their wisdom does not validate what we would call their cosmologies or their worldview. In fact, many of those cosmologies, many of those worldviews are actually, even within themselves, contradictory. Let me give you an illustration with umaguchi. Maybe some of you have heard of umaguchi. But let's say here, if you've never met a practitioner of the ancient art of umaguchi, let's say there is such a practitioner here in the Columbus area. And let's say you have a friend who's ill. Maybe they have some disease, they're just getting worse and worse. They're afraid to go to the doctors. They've heard, maybe they've gone to the doctors. They've gone to the conventional medical practitioners, and they're getting worse and worse. They've been given different medications. They're not helping. They've been told about Yuchi pines, but that sounds too backward to them. They don't want to come here, just like the Bible and stuff like that. Sounds very backward. So they're not interested in that. But they hear about someone who's practicing the ancient art of umaguchi. And so they go to see this practitioner. And as they go in, it's a little bit unusual. It's not like a doctor's office. There's these prisms that are hanging from the ceiling, and there's these different ancient art things, and this kind of Eastern music that's playing, and there's incense that's wafting through the rooms. And as the practitioner finally walks into the room with your friend, he starts undergoing some testing. And he first takes out a pendulum, and he starts swinging the pendulum over your friend, and he's nodding his head, And then he has the person take off their shoes, and he starts examining their feet, and then starts looking at their iris. And some of you are saying, amen, I'm glad there's someone here, doing iridology. And others of you, you're worried about that. But then he says, we're going to have to do some other things. And he takes you outside, your friend. He takes your friend outside into the sunshine. And he looks at the shadow that the sun is casting on your friend. And he's measuring the shadow. Okay. And so this is done. And then he does some very advanced techniques. And he says, now, many of my patients, they're a little alarmed by this, but don't worry. It's umaguchi has been established for many centuries, and this is one of the important ways that we make diagnosis. And he says, I have to taste your sweat. And so he begins licking your friend. in different places in his body. And some of you are saying, well, yes, I mean, this is what you have to do if you're practicing umaguchi. And others of you are saying, boy, I'm sure glad I'm at Uchi and not umaguchi. Okay? But, so anyway, he finishes all the diagnostic modalities, okay? They're all finished. And he says, you have a very serious blood cancer. And you say, I keep going between you and your friend. You can see how I want you to identify with those around you. So tells your friend that he's got this terrible blood cancer. And he says, you're going to have to do some things. You're going to have to make some radical changes. Well, what? You're going to have to stop all that meat you're eating. You know, he'd done a very comprehensive lifestyle assessment too. You have to stop all that meat and become a vegetarian. What, a vegetarian? And you're going to have to stop all those sodas that you're drinking. Really? And what am I supposed to drink? Water. Okay? And how much exercise have you been doing? This has already come out. Your friend not exercising at all. What do you think the Umaguchi practitioner says? You're going to have to exercise. And so the person makes all these changes. And what do you think happens to them? They get better. And they go back after a month. And the person licks them again and measures their shadow and waves pendulums over them and says, the blood cancer's gone. So how many of you are ready to take the next course in Umaguchi? Think about how powerful it is. So how many of you are convinced that this is a true healing science? Why are you shaking your heads? No, I just gave you a case of someone who was helped dramatically. Cured of cancer. Why are you shaking your heads? No. Okay, if someone says give credit to the Lord, others of you say lifestyle. Here's the point. By the way, if you were wondering, there really is no ancient art of Umaguchi. Okay? I told you it was just a hypothetical. I didn't say hypothetical. I said an illustration. But the point is, this is no different than many other healing disciplines. Some of them are just as ridiculous, I will be honest with you, as far as their worldview. But let me tell you something. Any of these ancient practices that have been around for many years often have sound wisdom mixed in with those practices. Right? And I've seen patients. They've gone to a practitioner who there wasn't I was not convinced at all that they, like in this illustration I gave you, that person probably didn't have blood cancer at all. But they gave them all these practical lifestyle changes to make. And so what happened? They got better. Here's the point. Just because a system of cure or a system of healing helps people doesn't mean the worldview of that healing system or even the explanations given for why it works are true. You following along with me? But having said that, it also does not mean there is no wisdom in their practices. Now, why I'm taking time to tell you this is I've found in Christian circles we actually have a problem. Most of us, if you're like most Christians, would not be comfortable with this statement up here. Let's look at it. We may be able to learn much about true healing practices, even if from a Western perspective we would label their healing system false. Is it true? Could we study things in Ayurvedic medicine in light of the Bible, and could we find true healing principles? I believe we can. Now, other people in the Christian world say Ayurveda, that's of the devil. It's the philosophical system is of Satan. We stay totally away from it, have nothing to do with it. Well, you'll have some bad news in a few minutes about Uchi Pines and Ayurveda. If you don't want to hear it, you better leave right now. I see some of you getting up and walking out. I appreciate that. You see, many Christian audiences want everything to be black and white. Right? They want it all to be bad and all to be good. And you see, I've got the white bad and the black good. Okay, I just wanted you to make a point of that because we have brothers and sisters of color here, and sometimes these illustrations are used in a way that that is misunderstood. Okay, but here's my point: we want everything sometimes black and white, and it's not that way. There's often things that are gray. So, because of their failure to embrace true biblical Christianity, many Christians, now we're not talking about non-Christians not embracing true biblical Christianity. I'm talking about Christians. I mean, sometimes people ask me if I'm a Christian, and I'm trying to think who's asking the question. Because I have no problem with professing and, claiming and identifying with Jesus Christ. But sometimes people that don't know anything about Jesus, they're asking me if I'm like those other people who call themselves Christians. And I don't really want to be labeled with some of those people. So I take a little bit more time to explain. Because many Christians are viewed as intolerant, arrogant, elitist, and xenophobic. What is xenophobic? Yeah, if you're not of my culture, you're bad. Now, we could easily digress right now. I don't know if we have some of our Middle Eastern brothers and sisters here or not. But some are saying right now we are in the midst of an unprecedented missionary opportunity in the Western world. Unprecedented missionary opportunity. Others are saying we are in the midst of a terrible crisis of great proportions, and they're speaking about the same situation. I'm speaking about the large influx of Muslim refugees into Western nations. Some are saying we've not done very well as Christians with bringing the gospel to the Muslim world, and now God has sent the Muslim world to us. Okay? Some are saying that. Others are saying, no, we're reading the news this morning. And we're getting worried that this is another example of terrorism. Some of you may have heard in Brussels today, another terrorist bombing. And you're saying, well, we need to put someone in the presidency who'd keep all these people out. Well, I don't know where you stand, but I want to tell you something. Many Christians are being given these labels by their neighbors. I want you to look with me at an amazing Bible verse. And this is what I take courage in. And this is why I like to talk about ancient secrets and modern health. Because there's an absolutely amazing Bible verse. And here's where it's found in the book of Romans. I've got it from today's English version. Some of you are following along, maybe in the King James or another version. Let's look at how Paul put it. He said, ever since God created the world, referring to God's invisible qualities, both his eternal power and his divine nature have been clearly seen. They are perceived in the things that God has made. Now, what is he saying here? In Romans chapter 1, he's saying every person on this planet has seen God. At least seen his handiwork in nature. So there's no excuse. The person who says, I'm an atheist, Paul is saying, I don't care what they say. They've seen God in nature. Now here's my contention. Nature is an imperfect revelation of God. Scripture is a perfect revelation, right? But in nature, Paul says these qualities of God are seen. Which people in the world, if we were to divide up the world in different ways, which people in the world would have the clearest view of God had all nations not had access to the Scriptures? If this was the only verse we had, what characteristic of a people group would help them know God better? I hear some of you saying things like living closer to nature. And this is how indigenous peoples have lived for centuries. So some of you may realize that I do a lot of work with Native Americans. In fact, I host a weekly radio show. It's called American Indian Living. It's a health show especially for Native Americans. It's heard on some 150 radio stations throughout the country, into Alaska and into Canada. And we feature programming especially for First Nation peoples. And you say, well, that's exciting. Some of you are excited about it. Others of you could care less. You say, I don't even know what a Native American is. But why do I mention this? Native Americans have some amazing insights into true healing practices. Now, I'm not saying everything every Native American believes is inspired by God. I have a mini-series called Listening to the Buffalo. It talks about the wisdom of Native Americans. You know when I first gave that talk? I gave it at a secular medical conference at the University of Wisconsin. And I was praying about how God, this is a very hostile environment to the Bible. I actually did give a Bible presentation at that very same conference a few years later. And the more spiritual I got, the fewer people came to my meetings. That just gives you an idea of the audience there. But I was trying to follow the Lord's leading. But the first time I gave a presentation there, I was praying about, well, how do I present these principles without telling them, just right off, that these are God's principles out of the Bible? And I was doing a lot of work with Native Americans, and I realized that many of the things that they valued in their culture are the same things that God gave us in the Bible. Do you know that many Native Americans were largely plant-based in their diets? You read some of it, and we have it in that, if you're interested in this series, we have it called, like I said, Listening to the Buffalo. It starts with an interesting story about a person who survived a buffalo stampede. So that's why it's called Listening to the Buffalo, and then also ties in with Native Americans' respect for the bison. But let's look at this a little bit more. I told you, that's the series, Listening to the Buffalo. When I present this in churches, we'll sometimes not just talk about Native Americans, we'll talk about Egyptian culture. And this, of course, brings us closer to the Bible. And then, as I told you, we'll talk about Daniel 1 as we're doing a series speaking about wisdom in ancient cultures. Because what culture has the greatest wisdom of any? It's the Hebrew culture that was instructed by God Himself. And so here's what I'm trying to do with people. I'm saying to them, let me give true story. The wealthiest person I ever cared for in a sanitarium, this is a billionaire, came to one of our sanitariums that I was working in. I've worked in, we call them sometimes sanitariums or lifestyle centers, like Uchee Pines. And I had this patient there, and I learned that she was a Christian. But she was also Jewish, and she was also Buddhist. She had her Buddha that she brought with her. You say, wait a minute, how can you be Christian and Jewish and Buddhist? Well, it just depended on the day of the week. Now, I'm being a little bit facetious here, but this is pretty much how it was. Many thinking people, now I know this sounds crazy, and you could even quote some Bible verses that would say it is crazy, but the point is there are many thinking people that say, oh yes, there's wisdom in everything. And so, I pray to Buddha sometimes. And then I really like Taoism. And I love to read from Confucius. And yes, Ayurveda is wonderful. And yes, so is Christianity. Oh yes, I love the Bible. And the Torah, yes, I like to worship with my Jewish friends in the synagogue. And oh yes, in the mosque, I go there too. And, with my Islamic friends. The point is, but you know what? This person was saying that they were favorable to Christianity, at least on some level. But many people, the crazy thing is the one thing they don't want is Christianity. Have you noticed this? It's everything else goes. So when we do this series, we show people all the wisdom in these ancient cultures, and then we end up with the greatest wisdom of all, and that's the wisdom of the Bible. Well, let me just give you a few more illustrations. Since I told you, I promised you I'd do this. Some of you will be disappointed to learn about Uchee Pines. By the way, I'm not disappointed. Many wonderful people in India. Some of you may have roots from that part of the world. Ayurvedic medicine, the ancient healing art, that has been practiced in India for centuries, millennia. You can see it dates back to 1700 BC. And the term Ayurveda actually comes from knowledge of life, or life knowledge. And they have this cosmology, this worldview about balancing energy forces. Now, by the way, I agree that this is not why Ayurveda has benefits. It's not because they're actually balancing the energy in the body. By the way, the same is true of acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine. They're not changing the energy flow in your body. Okay, there's no evidence that that's happening. But here in the case of Ayurveda, they have this worldview that if you look at it from an inspired perspective, from spiritual perspective, from a scientific perspective, you'd say it's what? You'd say it's not right. This is false. But instead of throwing out all of Ayurveda, when you meet someone who's from India and saying, I practice Ayurveda, instead of saying, well, that's all a bunch of nonsense. Or if they ask you about it, if they come to me as a physician and they say, I've been using Ayurveda, oh, that's of the devil. No, I don't say that. We can talk about some of the things that Ayurveda talks about that are wise. How many of you have heard that 2 hours of sleep before midnight is worth 4 hours after? Have you heard of that? The best I could find, you know where that was first written? That comes from Ayurvedic medicine. Comes from Ayurvedic medicine. So you say, wait a minute, I read that somewhere else. Well, could it be true? Could people in ancient India have made this observation that getting to bed early was beneficial? Could that have happened? Could God even have been leading people to make that connection? So what I'm saying is, they have some insights that are true. Someone says, practice Ayurveda. Wonderful. Do you practice the principle about going to bed early from Ayurveda? I love some of the Ayurvedic herbs. Do you know there are healing herbs in Ayurveda? And I actually saw one of them right here at Uchee Pines. Turmeric. Did you know this is an Ayurvedic herb? So what do you think? Do you think we should petition that Uchee gets rid of that turmeric? Well, why not? But that's Ayurveda. So, Satan was leading in that. I think there is some evidence, in fact, that Satan was corrupting the knowledge of all these cultures that didn't have the Bible. So they're seeing truth, and then Satan is weaving things into it. So what should we do? Should we throw out all the good with the bad? No, what I'm saying is we can affirm the things that are true. How about gymnema? Do you use that at Uchee? Gymnema sylvestre, that's an herb that has blood sugar lowering properties. So just because the system of healing is false doesn't mean that the people were not being led to see true healing insights. And they even had cutting-edge wisdom about meal timing, about fasting, and not eating between meals. How many of you think it would be good to recapture some of those Ayurvedic values? Now, I don't give seminars saying we should embrace Ayurveda. I'm just trying to help you see some different ways that I've approached secular people to help them see that it's not foolishness to look at the Bible. It's only consistent. If you're looking at these other cultures, you should surely look at the culture upon which this country was founded on. Not just throw it out because you were exposed to something in your childhood that you thought was ridiculous. Or because some church treated you bad growing up. Are you following along with me? Well, let me just tell you one other thing that we do in this first lecture. We won't do it here. We're going to give you a chance for some questions. Are we allowed to do that in these seminars? Can we have some audience participation? And I don't know if do we have a mic that lends itself to that or what? Okay, so we're going to work on that for our last 10 minutes. But let me just tell you the last thing that we do in this series. At least the first part, we spend about a half an hour talking about some of the background that we've gone over. And then we spend a half an hour speaking about a health-giving secret across cultural lines. Now, what kind of practice has been embraced by most cultures that has powerful health-giving properties, but is often never discussed in a lifestyle program? Do any of you know what it is? It's domesticated animals. So if you have friends who are pet lovers, we actually go through about a half an hour in this presentation and speak about the healing benefits of animals and also some of the problems with animals as far as disease. So that's something else that we do. So again, we're looking at different ways to reach our communities with healing messages. And if you don't like this whole theme, don't buy the DVD Ancient Secrets, Modern Health, or the one listening to the Buffalo, because those are the ones that deal with this. Now, some of you, you're kind of real worried. You say, this guy's going to give all these lectures here, and you just take time out. No, this is all you're going to hear about this kind of theme. We might sneak a couple things in just to remind you that I did talk about it. But we want to hear from you a little bit. I want to get some of your reactions. We've got a couple of roving mics. Some of you may have questions. Others of you may petition to have me banned from the campus. So we've got a young man speaking here. Go ahead. You're going to help with the mic. I thought he had a question. I was looking forward to that. Anyone have a question or a comment? The question I have for you, since you're all thinking, is do you see how this is something that might help you in your community or help you as you deal with people? Okay, I see a few of you nodding your heads, so I'm reassured. Others of you are looking totally bewildered. Okay, we have a sister here with a question.
Thank you. I just had a comment. I've noticed that in my own, the way the Lord is leading me and dealing with the public, that in some of the other like Jehovah's Witness or other Christian groups, First Day Christian groups, that I have, I've seen videos or something, one video is focusing on young people who are doing Bible-based, young people who, when they're dating, to seek a young man that is focused on God.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So, but when I come across this person who is also in this group, I can witness to them. And I said, oh, yes, I saw this or that, and that was wonderful, because you should seek someone who makes God first in their life. Mm-hmm. And it kind of opens the door. So I can see what you're saying about knowing and embracing the good in the other cultures.
Yeah, let me just mention this. If you have no problem reaching your community with solid biblical-based programs, I would recommend you do those. I mean, I've worked in New York City. I was working with a ministry there for a while. In California, it's very cross-cultural. I've worked in New England that has some of the most secular people in our country. So I've had to work in a lot of areas where Christian programming is just written off by a significant percentage of the population. Now, some of you here, you may say, well, we don't have that problem. We just say we're doing a Bible series on depression, a Bible series on heart disease, a Bible series on high blood pressure. You can do much more. I mean, the biblical principles are the most powerful. But the other thing we're called to do is, you saw in that Great Commission, the Great Commission was encouraging Christians to teach who? Teach all nations, okay? And even if you felt your community was very homogeneous, let me give you an example. It was just about 2-3 years ago, I was speaking in Europe. I was speaking at a conference in the Czech Republic, and then I was giving lectures in Germany and in Austria. And I actually was talking with someone from Stuttgart, Germany. That was the town where I was holding meetings. And I said, well, how are things back in your town? Because I was speaking in his home church. And he said, it's totally changed. He said, it looks like the same town. The buildings are the same. But now we have, it's like half the population are from Syria. They're Muslim. and the mosque is there, whatever. So the whole point I'm making is even if you think your community right now is very homogenous, when I was in Maine, we had a lot of Somali refugees and others coming. So our communities that may have been very homogenous and very friendly to Christianity, that's changing in many places. And if it hasn't happened where you live, it may be happening soon. And so what I'm trying to help us see is that the way we build bridges is we find ways to affirm what God has done in people's own history. Okay? We look for ways how God has worked. If you're working with people from China, there's some amazing things that the traditional Chinese have embraced. But there's some things that are totally crazy. I don't tell them that. I don't tell them that the Bible is the only truth when I first see them. You win their confidence. Have you heard about this, how Jesus worked? You mingle with people. As one who desires their good. You got that picture from the book Ministry of Healing? Yeah, so those foundational things we often forget. Now, among brothers and sisters in the church, I don't encourage people to study Ayurveda or traditional Chinese medicine to try to use these things for themselves. God has given us something much better. Okay? So you don't need that. But if you're there on the front lines trying to reach a diverse audience, I'm just trying to expand your perspective. And we'll do that in this lecture. And the next lecture, it's also, it's more germane to the Christian community, but it's another expanding lecture. And then the rest of my lectures are more focused just on health per se. We have another question.
Yes, question here.
Okay, I don't see the person with the mic. Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
Yes, I wanted to ask a question concerning holistic healing, because we know, as you mentioned, the iridiology. We have biofeedback, energy healing. Mm-hmm. How do you draw the line, or how do you differentiate what would be safe and what is spiritualistic, what we should stay away from?
No, excellent. Uh-huh. I will tell you the greatest wisdom, practical wisdom on this topic I ever heard articulated was from a fellow by the name of John Harvey Kellogg. And Kellogg said that when something new came out, now in this case we're talking about things that are old, but he said when something new came out, and I'm paraphrasing, he would compare what was written in inspiration. And if it was in harmony with inspiration, he would go fully into it. But if it wasn't, he would just stop right there. And I would suggest to you, yes, as a physician, I look at someone's eyes. But you want to make sure that what diagnosis you're making from the eyes is based on science and not based on some associations that may not hold up. Okay? And you want to use other forms of testing to confirm it. Don't say, well, I know I have brain cancer because there is a little blush in a certain part of my iris. Well, maybe that's true, but, get the MRI too. And make sure there's really that, tumor in that spot. So you can confirm many things that are diagnostic, you can confirm it. And if someone says, well, yeah, the tests don't show it, but we can pick it up sooner by examining your foot and swinging the pendulum, that, you really have severe liver cancer. Well, no, there's other markers you can measure or studies. You see what I'm saying? So that's when it comes to diagnosis. Make sure that there's something else that confirms it. And then when it comes to treatment, make sure those treatment things square with the things in the Bible, kind of things you're hearing in this seminar, that they're in harmony with those true principles. Okay, do we have one final question?
I also have a question.
Okay, we'll try to squeeze two in. Are you okay with that, or is there... So who's got the mic?
I do over here.
Okay. And then up here. And then
maybe it goes along with what the brother asked, but I have experienced church members that are open to reflexology and what is that other treatment with the needles?
Acupuncture.
Yeah, acupuncture, yes. And I've just had difficulty in knowing how to approach this in presenting it, that I believe it's not scientific. And I've read some things on it, so I would just appreciate your comment on that.
Well, I'm not an expert on acupuncture. I will tell you, some of you are from Florida. There's a researcher at the Mayo Clinic there in Florida by the name of Dorsher. I think it's spelled Dorshir. Maybe it's just Dorscher. And he's actually looked at acupuncture in relation to something called myofascial pain. And myofascial pain has, it's pain that has kind of an unusual distribution. It doesn't follow typical nerve patterns. And they've actually found that many of the acupuncture techniques actually correspond very directly to myofascial pain patterns. And so Dorscher isn't saying that you're manipulating energy fields and balancing the yin and yang and these things, that and that the meridians are controlling energy flow. I know of no scientific basis for any of that. But what Dorscher is saying is there is some true science between acupuncture. Just trial and error, they made connections where, stimulating certain areas do seem to help certain pain syndromes. So we shouldn't just say acupuncture is all evil because the worldview surrounding it is incorrect, or the philosophy behind the healing. So my point is simply this: how do you sort the two out? Well, the problem is that I have found is that most practitioners of acupuncture are steeped in the cosmology or the worldview as well. And when patients, I've never referred a patient to acupuncture. I'm not saying that there couldn't be a circumstance where I would, but I never have. And I talk with patients who've seen acupuncturists. They usually end up seeing me after they've seen the acupuncturist because it didn't, help them as much as they thought. And a lot of them say, if they're Christians, say this was really weird and there was, weird stuff, and I felt very uncomfortable there because they're not just doing, probing needles. They're into all this spiritualistic things, many of them. So here's all I'm saying. What I'm saying when it comes to some of these alternative forms of healing, we don't need to go there as Christians. We have something better. You all know about Uchi Pines, right? If you don't, you need to get my DVD that talks about brain health. Because just to remind you, that's where we're all at. We're at Uchi Pines, okay, if you weren't aware of that. I think most of you knew that. But the point is, so you know Uchi Pines, you know the kind of program that we're talking about here. Could acupuncture do something? You got great hydrotherapy and other things that are addressing those same kind of things. I haven't seen any need to send people for acupuncture. You following along with me? But having said that, it doesn't mean that if someone went to an acupuncturist that they couldn't have gotten any help, or if they got help, it was from the devil. Do you see what I'm saying? So I know that's not the answer we like. The answer we like, that's much more comfortable at the end of the day, is acupuncture is bad, stay away from it, and just go to Uchi Pines. Okay? But you see that? Now, I know I've stirred the waters. I'm not leaving, but we do have to take one more question, then we got to finish because we've already gone a little bit late. Go ahead.
Well, my question is basically in conjunction with what everyone else is asking. But I want to know if you have any thing that you can share with us about rest. And how the things because in lectures I've heard it, I've read it in some literature about how certain things occur inside of your organ replenishment, or whatever you want to call it, at certain times of the night. Mm-hmm. But I have not been able to find something to share where the people that are not into Eastern medicine and things like that shy away from, because I can't find a way to present it.
Okay, let me see if we can. I have some of that material in other talks. Some of it's in a talk called Longevity Plus, and I think we're speaking on that on Wednesday, which is tomorrow. So I'll try to make sure. All these talks are much longer than what I'm giving you here. So most of them are mini seminars, and we're trying to condense. I'm just trying to hit on some high points for you, and some of you may be frustrated by that. But we'll give you, in the Changing Bad Habits talk, that we'll give you a little break, then we'll come back for that.